Well, Robert Mueller's investigation was supposed to find evidence of Russian collusion, or maybe it was Syrian collusion, all these shadowy actors. Anyway, it was treasonous behavior that threatened the republic itself. That was the whole point of this. But a year later, it's no longer about that, not even close. It is apparently an all-purpose look at the president's personal, financial, and sex life. Huh? As if we wanted to know more about that. During their recent raid on the attorney Michael Cohen's office, the FBI apparently was hunting for information about Stormy Daniels in the Access Hollywood tape, rather than actually anything that matters. Piers Morgan is editor-at-large of thedailymail.com, and he joins us now. So, Piers, you know Donald Trump. You worked with me, did a show with him. You've been in our business for an awfully long time. Do you want to know, does the public want to know a lot more about the president's sex life, would you say?
No. No, Tucker. And I like Donald Trump, but I have absolutely zero, possibly less than zero interest in hearing any more about Donald Trump's sex life. I don't want to hear about Stormy Daniels. I don't want to hear about any of the others. I've known Donald Trump a long time, and I've always taken him to be a man who's been married 3 times and has regularly boasted for 5 decades of his love of women, and he's been in the gossip columns for the entire period of 5 decades with thousands of women. The idea that somehow it's shocking or relevant to anything involving his presidency that Donald Trump is a ladies' man, I think is ridiculous. What I think you're seeing here, Tucker, and the analogy I'd use is this. I have a brother who's a British Army colonel. For reasons that completely baffle me, twice a year he goes to a river in the darkest, most remote parts of Ireland or Scotland, and he stands in the middle of the river at midnight wearing fishing waders, and he has a rod and he has bait, and he's really there, he says, to catch a salmon, but he never actually catches salmon. He catches bits of wood that smash him in the back of the head for the next 5 hours of his midnight fishing trip, or he catches little tiny minnows or little bits and pieces that float down the river.
I've been there.
Here's the point. Isn't this really what we're seeing here? The Mueller investigation was set up to catch the big salmon. Donald Trump and collusion. He worked with the Russians to fix the election. If that was true, incredibly serious, and would almost certainly lead to the end of his presidency. To date, we have seen no evidence at all that I've seen, any clear, cogent evidence that he colluded with Russia to fix any election. So what we're now seeing, as it reaches its thrilling denouement, is a segue away from collusion and Russia into his sex life, into his lawyers' activities, who knows what they are. And look, you know, let me put this caveat out there. Maybe they've unearthed some incredibly serious felony. We'll have to wait and see. My guess is they're panicking. They're desperate. They needed to nail Donald Trump on collusion. They haven't got that. They've passed this to the FBI to raid these offices, and they're fishing. They're hoping, like my brother, when he stands in that water, to catch something, anything.
But unlike fly fishing, I can say, there's nothing inherently edifying about an independent counsel investigation. Why would liberals who, just like 20 minutes ago, it seems to me, told the rest of us that the independent counsel investigation into President Clinton's sex life was inherently illegitimate, in fact, an invasion of privacy that would terrify us, and by the way, they were probably right, those same people are now saying this is something, you know, they're going wall to wall with it. Like, is there no principle at all? There's no pretense of principle at all?
Well, it's rank hypocrisy. And I'd also say I don't remember any FBI raids on Hillary Clinton's lawyers when all the emails went missing. And the Liberals will say, well, there's no comparison and so on. There is a comparison. You know, if they genuinely believed there was something murky about those missing emails, wouldn't the right thing to have done would have been to do what they've done in this case and go and knock on the lawyer's door and find out what might be lurking there? But they didn't do that. So it's one rule for Trump, as it so often is, and another rule for the Democrats in this kind of situation. But there's a wider picture here, Tucker, isn't there, which is, you use the word unedifying. It's kind of worse than that. You know, when we've got potentially a crisis with Syria, with the Russians, and I was listening to your debate very carefully earlier. This is very serious stuff. What was the lead story in the New York Times today? Was it Syria? No. Was it Mark Zuckerberg revealing really that he didn't know very much about how Facebook works or how it may influence elections around the world, which I found pretty disturbing and shocking.
Me too.
No, the lead story in the New York Times, Tucker, was basically Donald Trump's sex life. It was that they'd raided the lawyers' offices because of an Access Hollywood tape from over a decade ago, maybe a bit of Stormy Daniels from a decade ago. I don't really care what Donald Trump
did. I know, and
did
it's degrading. I mean, the Times editorial
a decade ago.
The Times editorial page actually said today, if the president is innocent, he shouldn't be worried about violations of attorney-client privilege. I mean, whoa. Anyway, Piers, thank you. Great to see you, and say hi to your brother for me. I support fly fishing.
Good to see you.
What about the last administration? They knew about this. Why didn't they do anything about it? And where was the FBI? Piers Morgan is the host of Good Morning Britain. He's editor-at-large for DailyMail.com, and we're happy to have him join us tonight. So, Piers, you're obviously looking at this from a foreign vantage, and you think of the FBI as this kind of storied law enforcement organization that always gets its man. Have you revised your take on the FBI over the last year?
Well, I've revised it certainly in the last week, which I think has been one of the worst ever weeks for the FBI in its 109-year history, Tuck. And I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. One, take the Russia investigation. Donald Trump is president of the United States now and has been for just over a year. But there remains 0 evidence that says that he colluded with anyone from Russia in any attempt to fix a US election. That's just a fact. Now, Mueller may have some secret evidence, but he hasn't produced it. So right now, there is no evidence linking Trump to any collusion. So that then prompts the question, well, OK, but we now know there was Russian meddling in the US election. We don't know quite the scale of it. It may be, as Britt just said, reasonably small and not that significant. But there was meddling, and you would expect that. But whose job was it to deal with that meddling, to stop it happening? Well, that would be the previous president, Barack Obama, who from 2014, when the meddling started, it was his job. It was on his watch. And he's got 17 intelligence agencies led by the FBI, and it is their responsibility, in my view, to investigate and to stop and to close down the kind of meddling that we saw from these Russians. And that simply did not happen. And so I would say that if you combine that performance by the FBI in terms of the Russian investigation or lack of it that was going on, and then you look at what happened with the mass shooting this week in Florida, where this is one of the most spectacular ball drops that I've ever seen from any intelligence agency.
Yes.
The FBI were warned twice. Once that this guy had apparently posted on a vlogger's commentary that he was going to be a school shooter. He has a very unusual name, this shooter, Nicholas Cruz, with Nicholas spelled in a very unusual name. The FBI were not able to trace him. And yet he had a background check to purchase the AR-15 with which he committed his crime. They could have found him in 5 minutes. Cut forward 4 months to the start of January, and then we have a most extraordinary situation where it turns out somebody very close to Cruz, the shooter, phoned the FBI tip line specifically designed for tips about crime and potential crime, and said, this guy is dangerous, he's heavily armed, we think he may be planning to shoot up a school. They gave them chapter and verse on this bloke. And the FBI didn't even refer it to its head office in Miami. It didn't even pursue this, despite now having 2 warnings that this guy might be armed, dangerous, unstable, mentally ill, and preparing to shoot a school up. Now, you put those 2 things together, Tucker, and I'm sorry, this is a pretty appalling performance by the FBI, leading me to conclude in my column today that you'd be better off calling them the Federal Bureau of Incompetence.
Well, and you would add to that, and of course everything you said is factually true, and I think your interpretation is right. You add to that the Las Vegas shooting, which the biggest in American history, these months later, we have no understanding of why that happened, and there's a trail of incompetent decisions by law enforcement. So here's my question. Given all of that, I think your position is a reasonable one. Why is it that people who say that are denounced as unpatriotic by media figures in this country? Why is it unpatriotic to question federal agencies?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think that the partisan nature of American politics is now so extreme, and it's on both sides to a large degree, but certainly the anti-Trump hysteria in particular means that people are not able to see the wood for the trees. I come from another country. I look at this with a pretty clear, open mind. You know, I wrote 36 columns about Donald Trump for the Daily Mail last year. 18 of them were supportive, 18 were critical. I'm a reasonably impartial voice in this debate. And I would simply say to all those who don't want any criticism of Barack Obama for what happened with the Russian meddling, or for the FBI with the meddling, or now the investigation of this shooter, take a good long look at yourselves. Because if this has happened with Donald Trump, let's reverse it. Let's say that, Donald Trump had been the president when all this meddling was actually going on, and we knew it was going on. There would be absolute outrage that he hadn't stopped it.
Yes.
And so I think it's perfectly legitimate to look at Barack Obama and say, where were you when this meddling was happening on your watch? And the answer is that he and the FBI seemed far more exercised to be investigating other technology in terms of emails and Hillary Clinton and servers and so on, quite legitimately. But were they basically taking their eye off the ball and not focusing on what is probably, for the American country, far more serious, which is persistent Russian meddling through new technology, through American companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and others, using and abusing them to try and influence and corrupt voting patterns and voting thinking.
You can't argue simultaneously that that was a big deal and Obama is blameless for not investigating. I agree with that. Piers Morgan, thank you. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks, Tucker.
We will make America great again.